The financial crisis is 5 years old, but for its origins you have to go back much further. In the 1970s, 30 years of post-war boom, lubricated by cheap oil, came to an abrupt halt. Prices rose, living standards fell. Recovery was fitful. It wasn't until the 1990s that the good times came round again. And when they did, cheap credit made it easy for Western consumers to spend beyond their means. And so gradually, ominously, the biggest debt bubble in history began to inflate. From Washington to London, Dublin and Madrid, regulations were relaxed on who could have a mortgage. With cheap money everywhere, home buyers could buy a house and release capital to buy a new flat-screen TV, or 3. There was no shortage of willing lenders. The Chinese, who had been selling billions worth of goods to the West for a generation or two, were perpetually looking for somewhere to park their cash. Ireland and Spain, like the US, allowed their banks to lend hundreds of billions to developers who built homes in obscure areas and in large numbers. Huge private housing estates popped up in the most unlikely places. In the UK, restrictions on house building encouraged the banks to lend on commercial property developments. And when that wasn't enough to generate super profits, they joined in the lending frenzy in the US, Ireland and Spain. The debt bubble grew larger. By 2007, it became clear that the bubble was growing unstable. Banks in the US had been lending freely to less and less creditworthy customers in the hope of making bigger returns. And they had packaged up risky mortgages into bundles with no idea how safe they were. In the now famous meat pie analogy, nobody knew which pies were infected with bad disease. By that you mean bad debts. All were considered toxic. Banks' balance sheets were poisoned. Lending markets seized up. Central bankers came to their rescue, but the bubbles of debt were so large, only governments could cope. Many banks were given huge dollops of cash or nationalised. In this way, the debt bubble was pushed out of the private sector, only to pop up in the public sector. National state finances were pushed to the edge. In Europe, austerity cuts were seized on as the answer to try and pay down the debt bubble little by little. The fear is that this will merely transfer penury and renewed indebtedness back to private individuals, back where it started. In Britain, the demand that we cut the government's debts while households and companies pay back theirs has meant a second recession in 3 years. No one is investing or spending. Without either, there can be no growth. The only solution may be to borrow again and sow the seeds of the next disaster.